most elected officials, I think, spend 98% of their time trying to raise money to get reelected. Have Hillary Clinton on and get her to come to terms with the fact that she's just not trustworthy. I'm serious. 85% of the public have no access, really, to the legal profession. Gun control won't work, period.
I'm Tim Green, and I have ALS. But this podcast isn't about ALS. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I'm a father of 5, married for over 35 years, a New York Times best-selling author, an NFL first-round pick, and a practicing attorney. This is Nothing Left Unsaid, where my son Troy and I sit down with extraordinary people for raw, honest conversations about life, its toughest trials, and greatest triumphs. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Our guest has spent a career asking whether the systems we trust actually serve the people they claim to protect. Dr. Clifford Winston is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution who has challenged assumptions about regulation, markets, and institutional power with relentless data and uncomfortable conclusions. Clifford, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. I'm very excited to be here.
You have spent your life arguing that good intentions often produce harmful outcomes. What in your early life made you skeptical of surface versions?
I can't say my early life led to skepticism that certainly has characterized a lot of my economic career. I think I was almost sort of agnostic about most things. I think in my case in economics, it really was just from experience doing research, but then most importantly, coming here, Washington, D.C., and seeing how things tended to work in action.
What do you think, like when you got to D.C., what surprised you the most that you think like the average listener would just be shocked to hear?
That most elected officials, I think, spend 98% of their time trying to raise money to get reelected. That's what they care about. I mean, in terms of actual substantive policy issues, much of the work is done by, I would say, people in their early 20s. They're the ones that organize the hearings. They're the ones who provide a lot of information. Obviously, there's some older people who do this kind of thing, but I've been in a lot of contact with very young people doing this. And then the members of Congress and higher up, often then rely on them, for their input. And are spending most of their other time meeting funders and just trying to get outreach. But in terms of substantive engagement with these issues, it's pretty rare.
That sucks to hear.
If incentives drive the system, evidence can threaten it. When has your research most clearly threatened the powerful interests, and what happened next?
Well, I mean, I think the reality is, I'm an academic, and let's face it, we have to be realistic about how much people listen to us. You can do a study. I remember the example. People had done a lot of work about gun control, right? And there were some people coming up with results saying, if we do this about gun control, we do this kind of licensing and registration, we could have an effect in reducing fatal gun-related injuries, right? And I think the first President Bush was president, and he heard this, says, I just know gun control won't work, period. It ends the story right there. And that can happen. I mean, I've done work on airline deregulation and trying to measure what the benefits are. And some member of Congress can say, I just know it hasn't worked. And that's the end of it. I mean, it's not going to be any sort of give and take. I think there's the lack of curiosity, the lack of truth seeking, that's just not part of what this process is about. It's really advocacy.
Do you think they're saying it maliciously? Like, are they saying it to serve a different interest, or you think they're just ignorant or arrogant when they're making those statements?
I think all the above. I mean, I think a lot of them simply don't read all that much. They're not all that interested. I think they're a combination of defensive and arrogant about academics. On the one hand, you deal with an academic, they probably think the academic thinks they're stupid, which is probably not wrong. On the other hand, they think, look, academics don't do anything for a living, right? I mean, arguably, I've never had a job in my life. They get to think about what they want, they write things. They're not people who are out there working, right? So, what do I have to listen to this guy for? It's sort of a complicated relationship there. So you put it all together and you just don't get very much constructive engagement unless it's into the interest of either side. And what I mean by either side, there are plenty of academics that will work with people on a consulting basis and get very well paid to do it. And at the same time, someone will use an academic who supports their position and they can point to, this is a credible person from this institution who agrees with me. But that's about the size of it. I mean, sort of any objective learning, give and take, very rare.
And has social media changed? Like when you were saying the dynamic of how people are absorbing issues, obviously for the public, social media has changed a lot, but are politicians being influenced by that as well?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Because the entry barriers, that's the buzzword in economics, are so low. Anybody can weigh in on anything, right? And the more visible you are, the more you're going to do it because a lot of people will see you and you can, well, look, Trump is the extreme, right? Rapid fire tweets and it gets out there. But you'll see other people trying to do the same thing. I mean, it's because the cost is so low and you can be heard. On the other hand, you could also drown out other people. I'm not in that sphere, but I know other academics try to be, but it's pretty hard to break through. I think that I think is a real problem. Low cost entry barriers combined with low quality signals, and you get both of these things. There's just a lot of noise out there that dominates really pretty serious debates that we could be having and should be having, but it's very difficult, even more now with social media.
And if 98% of their time is worrying about getting reelected, obviously social media is going to be a key for them. So how do you kind of put the genie back in the bottle in that sense?
Uh, First of all, these are obviously the big picture questions, and I assure you, if I knew this, I'd be doing something else for a living. um, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, my usual answer for anything is competition. In other words, we need to compete, find more ways to compete to solve problems. That's usually the answer, right? The instinct is often, well, is there a government policy or any policy, even corporate policy, that I can recommend? And that is very rarely the answer to getting things done. The truth is, you want to get things done, you want things to have change, you want a competitive environment. And somehow it's got to be a competitive outcome that's desirable. Now, you'd think that'd be true in elections, but that's not apparently how it works.
That pressure exists in politics. It exists in academia too. Was there a moment when the data put you at odds with your peers and you had to decide whether to stay quiet or publish anyway?
No, fortunately, that's never happened to me, where I thought this is going to get me in trouble. My sense was always let the chips where they go. Do your work. You're lucky to be able to do it. I've always felt that. Get it out there and let the chips fall where they may. I had one piece of work that questioned antitrust policy. Most economists, this is one area where they think government intervention is effective, and a lot of them didn't like it, and there were a lot of comments about it and a lot of opposition to it. But I said, do better. I mean, that's the advantage also in academics. Do better. You have a better study, do it. And I felt confident in what we had and confident to the point where I was willing to make that challenge. And as far as I'm concerned, it really hasn't been met. Now, I'm not the most objective person on this issue, but I think that really is one that certainly stays with me.
What personal cost comes with being the person in the room who questions the premise everyone else accepts?
Normally, that could be a high cost, but you might be surprised how isolated we are, especially now. You know, frankly, life changed dramatically for me during COVID. Right before, when I worked at Brookings, I had actually a couple of spine surgeries that basically winded up with me working at home. So this was a couple of years before COVID. And so I just started working at home, got used to it. And then, right sort of when I was getting better, COVID began. Now, during one of my surgeries, as it turns out, there was a complication. So when COVID happened, they said, oh, by the way, you don't want to get this thing. So pretty much, I've been home for 8 years working. Now, Brookings knows this. I'm now what they call a non-resident senior fellow, but I'm used to it. I mean, I really don't see that many people. I work with colleagues, but it's all, email and every once in a while Zoom. But it's just me and my wife, and we're what now, 45 years going at it and still debating. So I'm not lonely, that's for sure. But yeah, I can't really say there's much personal cost. It's a pretty bizarre lifestyle. Even before then, when I was working, we traveled a lot, and so in a sense, a lot of my sort of life outside of DC was just many different places that we're fortunate to go to all over the world, just conferences, seminars, all that kind of stuff, which was a big part of the job that I never knew was a great part of the job. So, no personal costs that I have anything to complain about. That's for sure.
I think for people outside of this whole world, like I don't understand it at all.
Yeah,
So I think I'll be a good sounding board here.
yeah,
Like my interpretation was basically that a politician or one of these big corporations, they say like, hey, we need a study to confirm what we're going to do anyways. Let's go find someone to do it. Obviously that's not what you do, but are there people out there, like is there a part of your industry that is doing that, is just kind of confirmation bias for the not the highest bidder, but for somebody who's willing
yeah,
to pay for it?
sure. I mean, again, there's a sharp divide between consulting and academics. And, I like to think that academics doesn't do it. And actually, if you do it, it can be quite damaging to your career. I mean, you really are supposed to be objective. I could have probably made a lot more money and certainly gotten a lot of money to do things, but I could not work or did not work in areas, get consulting in areas where I was doing research on. So, it varies by people, and some probably are closer to the line than others. But for the most part, if you want to have any kind of reputation as a scholar, you really have to, keep your distance. But this does not mean that scholars don't do consulting. Now, I think a lot of the people that do will say, look, I'm not going to lie. And you're going to pay me, but you're going to take what I give you. And that's too bad. Now there are others that people probably argue, yeah, if you want something, they'll give it to you. But I don't know those quote people, so to speak, in the sense that consulting world. That's really what we're talking about. And I don't really know enough to comment on exactly how that operates. It just, they take positions that strike me as things that I'm not sure they would take them if they weren't getting paid to take them.
What shaped your instinct to follow the evidence even when it disrupts consensus?
That's when it gets exciting. I mean, you're lucky when you get that. Most of the time when you're doing any work, you have priors. You're not blindly going into it because remember, you start with a theory. The theory is based on sensible, rational behavior, and most of the time things are aligned with the theory. And the question really we're talking about is magnitude. So it's how important is this? It's not that it isn't important. It's just the question is it a big effect, medium effect, large effect? That's usually what it is. When you get something that you weren't expecting, And that's happened. I mean, a few times in my case. I wish it happened more. It gets very exciting because then you got to rethink, well, what was really going on here, and that's really where the excitement leads to. I mean, you should approach this in some sense as sort of a trail. You're following a trail. You're sort of an investigator, private detective, whatever, trying to solve the riddle of the case, right? And hopefully it goes to an interesting place, but it's even better if it goes to a surprising place that you really didn't anticipate. So that's a good thing when it happens. Most of the time, I'll read stuff, and probably regular people read stuff, even if it's put in a very intuitive, layman-esque way, and say, well, I knew that. That's obvious. All right. And a lot of what we do is that, but it's important to verify it. But when you get something that is a surprise, that's good.
What doubt visits you when you challenge a system that employs and funds people like you?
That can be a little tricky. Foundations are generally thought to be the pure place to get money. So in other words, you may have heard of the Ford Foundation, the Sloan Foundation, MacArthur Foundation. These are foundations that they supposedly have no axe to grind, and they're just willing to fund scholarly work, but they're human beings, and they're going to lean particular ways, and you come out certain ways. Probably they're going to be subtle about it, but they're not going to like it, and you may not get more funding from them. I've never had that happen. I can't say I've been, substantially funded by these foundations, but I've got funding from them. For the most part, though, it's been fine. I mean, they basically said, "Here's the funds. We want, we know what you're doing. Whatever you come up with is fine," and that's when it works really well. Government, again, the National Science Foundation is the big one, and it's supposed to be pure science, but you never know with these things. I don't know the other types of organizations, but like NIH is a big one in healthcare. They fund a lot of work. If they don't like something, I'm not sure how that shows up. It could. I'm not doubting it, because you're dealing again with human beings. Anything's possible. But for the most part, it's been okay. I think the thing as an academic that I've got to say, as all academics say, I wish there was more money. More funds, I think, is one of the good things that government can do, is provide funding for original research. Obviously, that's one of the big concerns I have now, is that the lack of support for that kind of work, and just the general hostility toward academic research.
Let's zoom out from that for a minute. You argue that government failure is underestimated. Why do people trust centralized solutions more than decentralized ones?
Great question. That's, a good answer has got Nobel Prize written all over it. There are people who have gotten Nobel Prizes for their answer to those questions. It obviously, this opens up many interesting things to look at. As I said, personally, the way I looked at it, I was agnostic going in, so to speak. I wasn't that close to government, or even studying what government did, to have strong opinions. I thought some things might be okay. They're well-meaning. How bad could it be, right? Now, a regular person, they're going to be further away than I am, right? They're not analytically thinking about this. Is not what they do for a living. They have to work for a living. That's not going to get them, too often involved, really trying to think through what government does. They'll follow what's in the newspaper maybe, but that's about the size of it. And of course, they grew up with it with their parents. So initially, they have some political views, depending on what their parents thought. And then, certainly their relationships with their friends and people in college or whatever. But they're going to be further away than I am from it. And so that's going to lead them in certain directions. But it's never going to be in directions like my direction, where they're constantly having their views tested. In other words, what is the evidence really telling me? So if that's sort of your attitude, and you go into this thinking, I think the government's pretty good, and I've never really been exposed to too many studies that point out the problems, basically it's okay, then you're not going to change. On the other hand, if you're hostile to government and say, I don't trust any of these guys, and I've always felt that way, and been in an environment, where that exists, and you're not going to care what the evidence says either. So I think it's really one of how much exposure do you have simultaneously to methodology and actual evidence where you start shaping your views. If you don't, then pretty much what you thought of when you were young is pretty much what you're going to think of when you're old, because there's no reason really for you to change. So I think for the most part, you have, especially now, people are sort of resistant to both. They don't trust the market and private sector because they think of firms as are bad, right? All they want to do is make money, and the word rip off is constantly used, right? On the other hand, we have somebody who got elected just attacking the government relentlessly and certainly getting a solid, 40+% of the public behind him, and then even more from time to time. So, I think we're now at a stage where there's really not, it's pretty nihilistic in the sense it's not clear what people believe in. My sense is I'm more on the extreme, and that I still think that markets actually are a very powerful way that we can address a lot of social problems. But I'm not sure that anybody has that much passion for government. And, some people who feel that way about markets, libertarians, that's sort of a different approach to things. Let me put it that way.
It seems like the trust in government, almost because of social media, like the having more access, and people almost like politicians almost talking too much, where you can see that they are really just people too. It seems like the only thing, like take like insider trading as an example, like everyone just knows it's happening. It's not like, oh, maybe it may be. Now it's just like there's people who have like, I don't know if you've seen online, like the Pelosi tracker, where every time she makes a trade, they copy it, and they've outperformed like Warren Buffett or something crazy like that. And it's like when you have things like that exist and everybody knows it's a problem. And I can't remember that. You might even know these numbers. I think it's something like 80+% of people support, limiting trading when you're in the government, and it doesn't get passed. And it's like, well, why doesn't it get passed? Of course, because they're benefiting off of it, right? Things like that, and term limits. When so much of the public supports certain things, and it's bipartisan, like literally the whole country, not the whole country, but 80% of the country wants it, and it's still not happening. I mean, I'm not surprised at all that people are losing faith in government.
Well, I'm not sure if insider trading is the number one thing. Certainly, at one point it was. I mean, I think it goes up and down, right, with the news cycle, so to speak. When we had our financial crisis, you bet people were very concerned about exactly how the financial markets were working, right? When the market crashes, I mean, it's and leads to a recession, sure, right? Right now, the market's doing great. You can have your own views on why that's happening, but Dow is very high, and we have these hot companies. So I'm not sure how many people are, by the way, sharing in this. My guess is, not that many, because frankly, there's not that many rich people in this country. So there you have your concern there, but I don't think the insider trading story, although undoubtedly true in a variety of different ways, is number one on people's minds. I wouldn't say that's what I would say.
I should have clarified. I don't mean insider trading in general. I mean specifically like politicians.
Yeah.
Insider trading.
The self-interest of politicians, I think, and that's
that just really like every people I know, similar age, similar circles. So I definitely am in a little bit of an echo chamber, but everybody I know is annoyed with. But it's just like, well, what are we going to do? They're just going to keep doing it.
Yeah. No, I think that's right.
They're the ones deciding on it.
No, I think this is in all institutions. I think this is these are very low points. I mean, look at the Supreme Court, right? For a long time, the Supreme Court was highly respected, and the majority of the people, when there were polls, had a favorable view of the court, right? That's not true now. The court's down, 30%, something like that. After overturning abortion, it went down. So Congress obviously is low. Trump, high 30s, maybe, approval. That's not good. Across the board, I think people are just wondering, where is the quality? Right? That's the question I would ask. Where is the quality? And I think, that's a big problem in institutions pretty much across the board. Uh, what's left? Movies, TV, popular entertainment? Is that where the quality is? I'm just kidding. But I mean, I think that's a growing concern in this country. I think is just faith in institutions. Where are quality people these days? What are they doing? Why aren't they taking? Why is there leadership? Why aren't the good leading the country? And I think
So,
across the board, that's I think it just I don't know. We don't have Washington. We don't have Jefferson. We're not getting Lincoln. We're not getting people like that. Where are they? What happened?
so
That's our big question.
I'm gonna put you on the spot. You said
Yeah.
foundations are the best place to get, I guess, to raise money from. So we're gonna donate a whole $1 from the Nothing Left Unsaid Foundation here, and say if I put you on the spot and said, what do you think the answer is to that? Obviously, you haven't had time to research it, looked into it, but just your off the cuff as a citizen, what's your guess?
As to why we're sort of at a low ebb now, I think that oftentimes these things are more cumulative than we realize. Um, I think that a lot of the economic changes, globalization, technological advance, probably has hurt a lot more people than someone like me would ever realize. It's much more competitive out there at the quote bottom end, which is a good 50, 60% of people. So I think that's contributing to general, you know, lack of confidence in what's going on. At the same time, I think more people see making money as more of what they want to be doing to get more financial economic security. The things aren't as secure as they once were. At least they don't see the world that way and think, I'm going to go in, I'm smart, but I'm going to go out and make money. Now, when I was in college, that was during the revolution, as I say, Vietnam War and all that. We were idealistic. I mean, everyone wanted to go to law school, but they wanted to go to law school to do good, right? Expose Nixon or something like that. And I think that idealism has faded considerably, is my sense. And economic reality has come in. And I think, as I said, smart people want to make money and are not going to be so concerned with making ideas, contributions of something that is not necessarily going to be lucrative. I think this is what's just been happening over time. It's more competitive, more fears, and many other probably other more subtle things too. What's interesting. Let me switch a little bit here. Is the dynamic changes with the sexes, the genders, if you will. There are a lot of women now who are saying, look, I want guys who are performing. I want somebody who's going to be financially successful, reliable, and I myself am going to be that way. And that's increasingly going to be putting pressure on men to perform and do well financially, right? And they don't, they're going to say, I don't want some guy who, wants to be an academic or do this. I want some guy who's out there, really bringing it in. And, these kinds of changes also may be subtle and things that we're really not so much aware of, but are happening over time. And women are being more independent too and saying, to hell with you if you're not going to do that. What do I need you for? These are all parts, I'm saying, of the dynamics of society, where over time you have different constraints, different preferences, and all of a sudden different changes among the groups that live here. So a lot is at work. Let me put it that way. I don't think it's one simple thing or one single thing. So maybe I don't earn the dollar, but maybe I touch some of the things that might be worthwhile.
We'll do it double or nothing. If you had a magic wand,
Yeah.
how would you get the talent into politics? Is it paying politicians more? Is it more of the idealistic nature?
Okay. I've asked this question a number of times on a variety of things. If I had a magic wand, what would I do? I'm going to switch gears completely here. Maybe I'll get back to what I would do on the political end. Maybe. But I'm going to start, though, with my answer to your question, to the magic wand question, because I want to get it out anyway. I would deregulate the legal profession. Now, you're going to say, what? Deregulate the legal profession? What do you mean? Okay. One of my areas and things that I write about and I believe strongly is the legal profession has an enormous influence on American society, much more, I think, oftentimes than people appreciate. Certainly in daily life, getting access to legal services is very important to many people. And what? The legal profession serves like 15% of the public, or put it the other way, 85% of the public have no access really to the legal profession. So, in terms of your quality of life, just many different things that are certainly never part of my life, but I think part of a lot of people's lives, just do not get representation for. Start with that for motivation. Okay, go from there. Legal training leads to many people, or an important chunk of people who go into government. Okay, and their training is obviously focusing on the law, precedents, right? Now, what I don't like about that as an economist is what they are doing is public policy. I don't care what they say they're doing when they say, we follow the law. And you probably heard of originalism on the Supreme Court. We make decisions based on what the founding fathers were really thinking, right? That's sort of a line of thinking that certain Supreme Court justices have. Originalism, right? Which I think is just a joke. All right. So my point is they're making public policy on a variety of things, but they're not trained to do it, right? They're trained to, quote, follow the law. What does that mean, right? You and I can read a law, read the Constitution. We can interpret it in any way we want and make it sound somewhat credible. That's all we need to do, right? What are we really doing? We're making decisions based on our ideology, right? If I want to make a decision on abortion, I can make it purely ideological. If I think it's something that women should have the right to do, believe me, I can interpret the Constitution that enables her to do it. If I don't and think this is a bad thing and immoral, or however you want to put it, believe me, I can find a way to justify it. And that goes all the way down the line. All right. What I want, then they say, well, why then you want to deregulate? I want lawyers in their legal training to appreciate that what they're doing is public policy and being trained to do public policy, right? So when they're in government making decisions, they're not thinking about law, they're thinking about policy. Policy is cost benefit analysis. You can take another approach, and that's fine if you can justify it. But somehow it's going to come back to that. And if you just have people who think ideologically and make decisions that way, you're just not going to have the kind of broad thinking, creative thinking that you have. Now, operationally, you say, well, how could you do that? Well, the Supreme Court could certainly do a lot and say, look, we're going to bring in expert panels. Anything we do that's important, that we really think is going to be challenging for us to do, we'll bring in people in other disciplines and other fields to advise us. And that will have a big say in what we do, right? I think if that kind of thinking started appearing in government, in open forums, it would make a huge difference. Now, of course, is this going to happen? We might get some deregulation, believe it or not. I mean, there's certain states that are exploring the issue through greater representation, access to justice. That's sort of the buzzword, right? I think in the West, they're talking about improving access to justice, right? We need to go more. But I think that gives me a vision of what things could be like that opens the playing field and makes it broader. New, broader ideas, balancing costs and benefits, drawing on evidence, because that's what you're going to have to do then to reconcile the trade-offs of costs and benefits. That would make a big difference. But that's a mindset that is not going to happen, I think, with the dominance that we now have with the legal profession, where this is a self-regulated monopoly that has their ways of doing things, and that's it. And it's very tough to get by that. And you talk about people that have incentives to maintain self-interest. How many times in Congress do we ever have any legislation about trying to limit liability, right? Which most of the money is going to lawyers. None, right? They're represented there. Who's there, right? So that's my answer to your magic wand question. And I hope I circled back a little bit to how it could improve government.
When you say limit liability, what do you mean by that?
Well, the concern is sort of everybody's sued for everything out of business.
Yeah.
Is there some way that, we could sort of prevent things from getting so out of control that you're literally putting a lot of companies, services, so on, out of business, right? I mean, people are just so afraid to do something because they'll be sued, right?
Yeah.
Right. And it's not, fun to go through that. And I think that, again, it's pretty tough to get around that kind of thing. Again, you see this with Trump every day. What is he doing? Threatening to sue people. Right? You say something about me, I'm going to sue you for what? God knows how many millions of dollars. You don't think that just, that provides incentives to people to shut up and be afraid of him? Of course it does. Right? I mean, that's not a good way to do things.
So I didn't understand when you were saying deregulate the legal community.
Okay, so
I thought you were saying like basically more lawyers, and I was thinking, man, that sounds awful.
No. People think that. Okay, a response again understood. A common response to that recommendation is we already have too many lawyers. That's wrong. We don't have enough lawyers, but the problem is we don't have enough of the right kind of lawyers. The vision that I have are lawyers who would be different types. In other words, these are not the kind of people who'd go to Harvard Law School for 3 years or Yale or whatever, right? These would be people who would go maybe not even necessarily to a law school, but more of a trade school for 1 year, specialize in a very specific thing, divorce law, real estate law, something like that, and serve the public. There any number of real world things that I say I don't have enough experience with that cause hardships for people. You don't need to go and get a 3-year legal education to do it. You could probably even get this as an undergraduate and start it anyway. And maybe even that would be enough to provide legal services. So what I'm saying is we don't have licensing. Deregulation means eliminate the entry barriers and the license requirements for lawyers.
The whole time I've been laughing in my head because you're talking to two lawyers. It doesn't mean we disagree, though.
We are both lawyers, but I was letting you keep going. Once you heard that, I didn't want you to change your answer.
No, I won't. I'll be more. I'll double down. You have a law degree?
Yeah, both of us. Yeah.
When did you after you were in the NFL?
He was doing it while he was in the NFL. In the off seasons, he was going to law school.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah,
amazing. I knew Shaq O'Neal was a policeman.
I think there's too much litigation, but what you're saying, if more people could become lawyers from a 1-year degree, then doesn't that result in more litigation? If your premise is only 15% of the public is getting
more
proper
representation. You want more representation. Look how many people do not get represented by a lawyer. There's your problem, right? I mean, yes, you have litigation with wealthy people, right, and corporations. But, as I said, the 85% of the people in society, you think they ever have a lawyer represent them for anything? No way, right? They don't.
Yeah.
Look how much simple legal services cost.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Right? It's crazy. And you don't
Yeah.
need to go and get a fancy degree. You could even start as an undergraduate, right? I mean, you went to law. If you went to law school, look, what you learned in law school, a lot of it you could have had in college as an undergrad, right?
Sure.
Wasn't that
Yeah.
hard? Come on. So there you go. Why not start there?
I won't go that far. The bar exam is very hard, but I think if you show up to college and if you're 18 and you know you want to be a lawyer, there's nothing in law school that you couldn't have done when you're 18. You had to be 21 or 22 to do it. But
Yeah,
I think there's more to, on. I agree with. I think we agree on the end game. I don't think we
yeah,
agree on the how to get there. But I don't think it's. I don't think we'll ever know until something happened. But I think like the amount everyone's suing every company on every single thing. You trip and fall, sue the company. You slip on ice,
yeah,
sue
absolutely.
whoever's on that block. There's the famous cases where like the woman burnt herself with a McDonald's coffee and won $1 million
Right,
in
sure.
court. It's things like that that
Yeah.
just make everyone's so litigious.
But litigious at the same time as said, it's a select group of people. It's such a small share of people. It gets a lot of attention, but people don't appreciate whether the 350 million people in this country, you know, 280 million of them aren't dealing with lawyers. Very few of them are, and that I think is a big injustice in a number of cases. And I'm not saying that by deregulating lawyers, you're going to have people with an undergraduate degree going in front of the Supreme Court or
Yeah.
representing even a corporation in a very challenging, case,
Like
copyright or
small
whatever.
claims, things like that. You're
Yeah,
saying because
yeah. It's all
there's
that
not even
kind of stuff.
with how much lawyers cost. It doesn't even make if it's under $5,000, you're better off not suing anyways. With how
Absolutely.
expensive. But what I'm saying to you is if you deregulate it, and let's just say you quadruple the number of lawyers. So instead of
Well, hold on a second.
15,
Take a little slower.
yeah,
Let's go through the steps of what would happen if we deregulated. Okay, I just want to take a little
yeah,
slower. In other words, let's say we allow my world, which remember it does not prevent what we have now. So I'm not saying that we end 3-year law schools or anything like that. Not at all. All I'm saying is no license required. Okay, it's optional. You can get one. You can get a law degree. You can pass the bar exam, but you don't have to, right? In other words, I'm saying that we'll allow the market to determine who is going to practice in the sense that they're going to have to get clients, they're going to have to get a reputation, and they can use certification as well as degrees and bar exam passage rates to signal about their quality. Okay, so that's the rule of the game. Now, my guess is here's what will happen. You'll have a variety of things going on at the lower end, right? Now, you've heard of probably stories of people involved in unauthorized practice of law who never had a law degree, but they're serving
sure,
people, right?
yeah,
More of them are going to, those people are going to come out of the woodwork, right? There are people who've done that, who actually were doing it, and there are people who want to do it. You probably know the story of the most famous legal advisor on, I think it was something like helpmelaw.com. So people would go in right to this website, and this is their favorite guy who would give them responses. 15-year-old high school student. No, the most popular one. You go after high school, go in and look it up, law library, and give answers, right? So we're going to have those kind of. Obviously, we're going to have older people, but whatever. They're going to come out of the woodwork, and people who would normally wouldn't be able to practice because of UPL, they will practice of a certain sort of law. They're not going in front of the Supreme Court, right? They're not representing Microsoft, all right, but doing certain things to fill things out. Okay, legal education is going to change, right? No American Bar Association certifications of law schools. You do what you want. You can get certification if you want it or not. You can offer your own course of study. And what I'm hoping is a big part of that course of study will be modules if you want to go into government. So legal training for people who want to go into government service, and then even there, various specializations in economic policy, science policy, things of that nature, right? So we're combining then various disciplines to get a fairly sophisticated degree, but it's for people who have a long run goal of serving in government in policy positions, providing advice and obviously leading ahead. And then I would even have another one, which is intended more for people who are looking to be judges, pointing out the weaknesses of so many decisions and what was wrong in terms of how they were done. And the general flavor, you both went to law school. When you took torts, when you took property, when you took con law, were there ever any instances where there were, quote, retrospective assessments of how those laws worked? In other words, was there any effort ever to say, okay, we have gone through these laws and we've assessed how effective were they in preventing crimes? How effective were they in contracts? So on and so forth. None. That work is not done. And I'm telling you that because that's rarely done in antitrust. So when I mentioned that story about antitrust, when I wrote that paper, I was shocked. No one had done that before. I said my thing going into it was pretty positive. In other words, my attitude going in was I thought antitrust was pretty good. Certainly not bad, and not useless. Whereas many economists, were very positive about it, and these were smart people who I knew and liked. I thought, yeah, and I started then going through it. This is what Tim's question. One of the shocks was this. My God, there's no evidence this stuff has done anything that's particularly helpful. And that blew my mind. And that's what was going on. But that's also part of the culture of law school. There are no retrospective assessments of how effective this has been. Anyway, please, sorry.
No. So I think I agree that I think a cost benefit analysis kind of course or training in law school would be a good thing. I think if you had people off the street, kind of no training, whatever, were able to do it, I think you'd have a lot of opportunistic. The law is something that's too serious, and something like, let's just say a divorce is like an example, or something criminal. If you can't afford a lawyer, like a 3-year law school bar exam lawyer, and you end up with someone who's kind of opportunistic, taking advantage of hey, I don't know that much, but I know more than them. I could probably make a quick buck here. I think the law can be such a harsh penalty. If you get a divorce and one side has a lawyer and one side doesn't, it could be a really, really bad experience.
Absolutely.
And I think I think you could get so outgunned, it could almost be worse. I guess not worse than no representation, but it's like the free pro bono lawyer, at least they're trained. Whereas if you come into court, if my dad doesn't do this kind of law, but if my dad was representing you, right. And I don't know, some of y'all know, my brother, who's never went to law school and is 18 years old, was representing me. I'm going to have a really bad outcome.
That's right.
And I think that's the danger in what you're saying. But I also,
that's consistent with what I'm saying. You're consistent with me because you're saying the value of representation. Right.
But the value of representation, if you open it up so anyone could represent, if the 15-year-old goes to court against a Harvard law, MBA, whatever kind of person.
It's better than nothing. It's better than nothing. That's my point. It is better than nothing.
But aren't they getting the free, aren't people that can't afford it getting the pro bono?
The share of pro bono services that are provided, it's this big. It's tiny.
Sure, but how many people? So let's use the 350 million people, right? And you're saying 15 million need representation. But 85% aren't. But how many people of those 85% they don't even need, they don't in their course of life, in their year, they don't need a lawyer, right?
Hopefully most of them don't.
Right. So I don't know how big the gap is, and you might literally know. I'm going off the top of my head, but what I'm saying is I think bad representation is so dangerous, and I think if you opened up, And this is not like me trying to protect self-interest.
Yeah.
I don't go do litigation or that kind of stuff. But I think if you opened it up so a high schooler could be in court against the it's kind of like the rich get richer. I think if you have, let's just say somebody suing like, I don't know, an oil and gas company, and let's say I am, and my representation is the 15-year-old on the website, and they're going to get the highest powered lawyers in the country.
Right.
I'm not going to, I'm screwed.
All right. Now, a couple of questions. Let me go with the first question, the better one. How much bad representation you think goes on now?
Oh, I think there's a decent amount of it, but I think that's
There's
with,
quite a lot of. So
I agree with you.
A key part of my argument is that, remember, the whole motivation for licensing was what we call imperfect information in economics, right? In other words, you don't know how good the quote the lawyer is, right? So you're concerned there that somebody says, "I'll represent you." You as a consumer don't have perfect knowledge about the quality of that person. So the justification for licensing is to signal that you have degrees, you have certification, you passed an exam. So you're providing information to that consumer that yes, you have reached a minimum standard of quality. Okay, that's the justification for it. All right.
That's my first part. Yeah,
Right.
I got
Now,
another part, but that's the
in
first part.
practice, we know. I mean, there's tons of evidence that it is far from sufficient as guaranteeing a minimum level of quality just for so many people who are on probation from various bars, facing suspensions, to the most amazing stories imaginable about how lawyers have treated their clients, that you got to say to yourself, wait a minute, you got to be kidding if you're going to believe in this. And the big problem is that it creates trust. So when you have a system like this where it's all about licensing, then you sort of put your guard down and sort of say, yeah, I trust this guy. If he got a degree and he passed the bar, he's got to be decent, right? Why would your system, which doesn't have that, be better? My point is, you're gonna wake up and you're gonna say, look, if I want to buy a car, what am I gonna do? I go online and I can see what people say about them. There's so much information that I can learn about any product, right? I'm going to be an informed consumer. And what I'm trying to do is create a culture now where if you're going to get representation, you're not going to go and sue an oil company with a 15-year-old. You're going to go online. You'll look, you'll see, and it's going to change the world again. You're going to have to realize, look, the game is changing. I've got to be an involved consumer. I can't be just trusting to some degree, and I've got to learn what's going on out there. So we're going to ask you to do a little bit of work, but in the long run, I think that's going to help our legal system. It's going to help the people involved, and ultimately, it's going to help the public.
But if the argument is that the certification gets trust, and people are ultimately getting bad representation anyways because there's bad lawyers and bad lawyers exist, what if you said the same thing about the medical field?
Absolutely. And they have the same concerns. They have the same concerns. And we see things that are changing in the medical field that are not in the legal profession.
But don't you think that's dangerous?
Remember, you can get some very useful medical services, right, from nurse practitioners and other people, a lot less expensive, right, than obviously your 4-year medical degree doctor and all that kind of thing. No, they're sensitive to that, and they're making changes in that direction. In addition, unlike law school, there are schools, if you will, for clinical training where people continue to learn these kinds of things that could be helpful to patients. So
I just think it'd be so dangerous.
I think we can loosen things in the medical field too. Actually, what I regret not doing was I actually had a book that came out last year about removing occupational, or let's say reforming occupational licensing in our leading professions, finance, law, and medicine. So I had an expert. I wasn't the one who wrote this chapter about the medical field, and you'll see some very interesting similarities. He would not go as far as what I'm talking about. The legal profession is completely deregulating the medical profession. But as he pointed out in that chapter, there are lots of areas where things could be opened up and again, improve access to public services, even in the medical field. Same
I think
thinking.
I think the medical field, I think both of them, my point, I guess the first point would be I think it's dangerous to some extent. Like just because it's imperfect, it doesn't mean I think flooding it with shysters could be really dangerous. But I don't but also like maybe I think in the long run, to your point, in the long run that might win. If the consumer becomes a better consumer,
That's right. That's
right?
what's
That's
key.
that's what you're banking on. It would be,
Yes.
I think your scenario is basically hell for 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and then maybe it's better. But my bigger concern is if how maybe what percentage of the country right now is suing and whatever. But how that number, I mean, if I can go get my buddy from high school and say, hey, you want to represent me? I'm suing my local restaurant. I'm going to sue him because I got sick after I ate there. Let's sue him. Might as well. Well, maybe we get a buck. Maybe they pay us to settle,
But why would
right?
you do that? I mean, why wouldn't you follow my model? Is go online and start looking for somebody, see what their track record is, right? And investigate
So
in
let's
somebody
use
who's got a little more quality than just your
yeah.
buddy from high school, right? Why not do
So
that?
no, but I think I get to my this is like my second point of the argument. And let's just say it's perfect. We have all these people come out of the shadows who are going to do enough, like they're going to do a good job with specific parts of the law, and it works. I think now the amount of litigation is going to go up 2x, 5x, 10x, and I don't know I feel like that hurts, doesn't help us as a country.
Well, what I'd like to believe is that the litigation changes that we observe are at least going in a more quote quality direction, in the sense they are doing things that really are important to be litigated, and in part because people are trained to understand what are more important issues. But that's I'm being a little idealistic about that.
Yeah,
At this
I think
point,
you're
but
underestimating.
here's the thing: anytime these kinds of changes are proposed, and I believe this, and I think this is sound advice. You got to treat them as experiments first. The advantage we have in this country is we have states who can be laboratories for this kind of thing, and I think we are very slowly moving in that direction. Some states you want to loosen things up and allow for quote non-lawyers to be representing people, right? And I think let's just see how that kind of thing works.
Yeah.
Before we deregulated, we learned about things from the states. You know,
Yeah.
Airlines were unregulated in California and Texas, and we saw how they did before we went nationally. I think the kinds of things we're doing now might get us some information that would be quite informative about what would happen if we expanded what I'm talking about. And I think that's encouraging, but I think it can reverberate through all of society if we did this. But
I think it's assuming that the litigant that the I don't know, the plaintiff, I guess I'll say, is acting in good faith. If a plaintiff's acting in bad faith and can go online and get a lawyer for $50, I think the amount of litigation could be astronomical. But maybe if the defense cost is also $50, it doesn't matter. But I don't know.
I think that the heart of it on my end would be market forces. In other words, people have to be incentivized to behave, in good faith. In other words, if the shyster you're talking about does not have any constraints on how often he can do this, then yes, your concern is valid. But I think a key part that underlies my recommendation here is the enormous change, and this is back to Tim, on social media, right? What's very different about this world than decades ago, or not even that many decades ago, is you can learn almost instantly about the quality of any service, right? A restaurant has a bad meal and kills somebody. How long do you think it's going to take before somebody finds that out and that restaurant is going to take one hell of a financial hit, right? It's going to be disastrous. And if there's some guy, your high school student goes out, represents you, and doesn't know a thing, that's going to go up on, and he'll never get anybody else. He'll just write up there and say, "Don't ever go to this guy," and he won't get anybody. And that's what I'm counting on, is that idea of market forces where information is so important, much easier to get, and obviously is very influential, as we know in many things, whether it be movies, restaurants, all sorts of stuff. Probably even this podcast. I have no doubt that I'm not in that world, but the podcast world knows about you, and you've developed a really good reputation, right? But if you had some guests on and I don't know who it was, but it didn't go well for whatever reason, that would hurt you and probably hurt your viewership. And that's how all this works. And that's what I'm counting on in my recommendation of trying to open things up.
If the markets reflect human nature, what does that reveal about our virtues and our flaws?
Well, I think what I'm getting at is I don't think humans are necessarily bad or good in extremes, but I think they react to incentives. As an economist, I have to believe that. And what I'm trying to do is create an environment that provides, quote, the right incentives, quote, to do the right thing. And what I think the legal profession has done just the opposite by limiting competition and by getting so much focus on getting money. Oh my God. The people they're expecting when they come out of law school, to make quite a bit. So let me put it that way. I don't think that's the right incentive. And I think we can do better with creating the right incentives to have better things happen.
Is there a special policy belief you held strongly that the data eventually dismantled?
That's I can't say unambiguously there's anything quite like that. In my case, back on the legal profession, the empirical work that I do is more to focus, and this is what lawyers don't like. Do you practice, Troy, now?
No, we both are barred. We're both barred and licensed. We both, for different firms, do more business development. So we're not handling a lot of cases. We're more, if you said, "Hey, I'm in New York and I'm trying to whatever. I have a will, I have a trust, I have a divorce," then we would kind of refer it in our own firm to a specific lawyer. So it's more,
Okay.
So yes, I'm practicing, but I'm not like handling a file. That's why I'm saying it sounds probably like I'm so biased, but I'm really not. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate a little bit.
No, all good. But you do earn a salary as a lawyer.
I have a it's kind of a unique setup, but it's based on referrals.
Okay. The big empirical work that I did was I estimated what we call the amount of economic rents, that is payments above what you would normally get in a competitive market that the legal profession earns. All right. Per lawyer, $60,000 per lawyer. So you can imagine how many billions this is. Right. So the big thing that most lawyers don't like about my recommendation is what's going to do for their salaries. Now, you're going to say, well, if I'm in front of the Supreme Court, how can my salary go down? Well, maybe not. But what happens now if law firms have to start competing with corporations? What happens if they have to start competing with foreign law firms who could do a lot of what they're doing now, but just aren't allowed to practice? What happens if, you can go any state you want and take on a case and represent somebody? Just that alone is going to do an awful lot to increasing competition. And what I'm estimated is those rents are not going to be what they were. That's for sure. And
Yeah.
that's something immediately that most legal people, when they see what I'm talking about, focus on, because I provide some evidence on that I think is pretty compelling. That's the problem.
I think AI
be much less.
Well, I think AI might do that. AI might beat you to the punch, because I think AI is going to make the consumer, the customer is going to be so much better informed. And I've seen people, and I know people in business, in the kind of business side of my life, that they're having these things, Claude and ChatGPT and Gemini or whatever they're using Grok to write. They're saying basically like, write me the draft of this, let's just say contract.
Right.
So when they give it to the lawyer, they're just saying, hey, review this draft, which that cuts the hours billing, right? That cuts it by whatever, 50%, let's just say. It's probably more because the document's already there. They're making tweaks rather than anyway. So I think AI is going to have a radical impact. I think that you'll probably like.
Well, in the thing that I told you about that I wrote, my big concern about AI is UPL. We know those cases are coming, right? Anybody starts trying to do anything with AI, and there are going to be all sorts of suits brought against them for unauthorized practice of law, unless they're lawyers that are doing it, right? And
Yeah.
and of course, they're not going to be doing this to lose money. So if this is being initiated from the side of the legal profession, they're looking at to get money. They're not going to lower their rates. They may lower their costs, but they're not looking to say, oh, by the way, we're going to pass these cost savings on to you. Not if they don't have to, right? That's the whole idea of competition, right? If they're competing with corporations now, or people from other states or other countries, yes, that's the kind of competition that drives down prices. But if they still have their entry barriers, they're gonna keep most of those cost savings themselves and make more money. So that's what I want.
UPL is the unauthorized practice of law, for anybody who didn't know the acronym. But also, I think also though your solo practitioner law firm, I think they're going to be able to compete with
Oh yeah, absolutely.
bigger firms, which is
Yes.
good. And I think that'll
Yes.
pull down. Well, maybe we'll see. I guess.
Oh no doubt. I mean, your guy who goes just say gets an undergraduate college degree can just hop on ChatGPT or whatever and get quite a lot of information that he would want on a case. Make his work a lot easier. Wouldn't have to pay for research assistants. Absolutely. No, I think that would be another reason why, contrary to your concerns about these people being effective, they could be quite effective at pretty low cost. And of course, those cost savings would be passed on.
I'm saying, I think like instead of the big firm, instead of the $1,000 an hour, New York City firm, you could hire the local one-man shop for $100 an hour and get not the same result, but maybe say 80% of it instead of being 10% of what it was 5 years ago or something
We'll
like that.
find out if we
Yeah.
do it. Yeah, but again, I think back to what started this, I'm also hoping though that it does change the whole mindset and thinking of the legal profession in terms of policy making and problem solving, right? Not to just be so wedded to quote precedent, as if that really is revealed truth about anything. God, I realized I was so harsh. It wouldn't have changed. If I knew you were lawyers, I would have said the same thing.
I don't think it changes anything. And I think it's funny.
I think that's what's so important. We need that.
The big disagreement that you and I have is that I think your way results in more litigation. You think it results in
Well, remember,
less.
the question is whether it results in more worse litigation. I don't mind if it results in more, if it's better for society in getting certain people represented. Obviously, if it makes things easier and all you want to start doing is, suing everybody,
Frivolous,
then you're going to
frivolous
realize
lawsuits,
something
sure.
too, though, that you're never going to have any services because people are afraid to provide anything because they'll get sued. So there are downsides to this thing.
That's what I think. That's what I'm afraid of. It almost seems like that now. It's like getting insurance for a small business is so expensive because you're going to get and you have to have it because you're going to get sued for something.
Yeah. No, it's an issue. Again, no one. I don't hear Congress talking about it. Wonder why?
You got to get to the 21-year-olds running.
No. Look at all the people who are lawyers in Congress. There's your problem, right? They're not talking about this. They're still loyal to it. Who knows? If they're voted out, they have to go back and forth.
Is there a policy debate where you now think you were incomplete or wrong?
No, I mean, it's hard for me to sort of pinpoint things. I think it's more a question of pushing things more. In other words, I had limited knowledge at the time and worked on this issue, but in retrospect, I could have pushed it further to look at something else. It's more, you know, I would say more in scope, I would say, than just the narrowness of being incorrect or erroneous in where I was doing is more just too limited. I would have preferred to have more vision. Obviously, that's very important and something everyone should want. But I'm still at it. I sort of rationalize it saying, yeah, okay, I didn't know it then, but I'm still doing this stuff, so I'm learning still.
Have your arguments ever been used in a way you did not intend?
No, not really. No, again, since most of my stuff is with academics, and we got to be careful about that kind of stuff because you're academic and you misrepresent another academic. That's generally, again, that's going to hurt you in terms of your reputation and if people trusting you and people working with you. So I don't have that kind of concern. I think there's some people that might, but fortunately, my experiences have been good in that regard.
When has your research most clearly threatened a powerful interest? And what happened next?
My wife always thought that. She was always worried about certain things. But, it's frankly more in things like op-eds. So one of the things I do, it's probably different than most academics. This is sort of a Brookings thing, is I do write a lot of essays or op-eds saying things like, for example, I came out, maybe, I don't know if I may even send it to you. I came out with a piece in Barron's arguing that, Canada's decision to allow Chinese electric vehicle companies to sell electric vehicles from China in Canada was a good thing, and that we, the US, should do the same, right? And so obviously that's not going to make the auto industry very happy to see somebody write that. Although amazingly, and I really do mean amazingly, Trump seems somewhat sympathetic with that by saying if they came and produced the cars here, that would be a good thing. I'm not sure he knew what he was saying, and wouldn't surprise me if he rolls that back a bit. But setting that aside, that's the kind of thing I could write that the auto companies, wouldn't like. But quickly, they would say, look, there's no reason for us to hire a hitman and take this guy out. He's just some academic that nobody's going to listen to. So, fortunately or unfortunately, I think the fact that I'm not perceived as a threat in, quote, the real world has kept me safe when I write these things. Now, I have one coming out, and I actually look forward to it coming out. I will send it to you. It's about the affordability crisis. And I write about this from the perspective of the automobiles. And I argue that really is the center of this issue. That, because of trade protection, the prices of cars have gone up dramatically over time. People don't even appreciate this, that the average price for a new car is $50,000, which is enormous, really. And, as an entry-level car, it's very hard to get one because so few of those cars are being produced. All those, entry-level cars, they don't make them anymore. They got out. The auto companies have gone to SUVs and just more expensive cars. Even used cars are quite expensive. And then taking it further, once you have people who have trouble getting access to cars or affording them or affording ones that run, oftentimes they'll get them, but they break down, that affects everything in life. And that's what we mean by an affordability crisis, because it could affect your work and leisure and all sorts of things. Anyway, so I write about this, but the punchline is this is all the result of large part, not all of it, but large part is trade protection, which has been going on for decades. And most recently with the latest round of tariffs. And I'm saying all this is doing is hurting consumers and significantly contributing to the affordability crisis. Now, When that piece comes out, I'm sure the administration won't like it. But again, I'm sure they'll quickly dismiss me or, you know, get somebody to just say I'm a loser. But I think that's the kind of thing that if we were more influential would get me in trouble.
If legal barriers were lowered tomorrow, who wins and who quietly loses?
Oh, I think that society overall will win. I think certain lawyers who are totally incompetent will lose. I think others who have earned enormous rents will lose. And as I said, I think overall most of society will benefit.
When your research challenges institutions that claim to protect the public, what responsibility do you feel toward the people who might be destabilized by reform?
They're economists, and I would say I'm not different in this way, tend to be cavalier about that. And I think back to one of your other questions, that's probably one of, again, I would say mistakes, but things with experience I've learned. Transitions are much more difficult and take much longer than one imagines. Okay. But, and I think this is something, it's tough, but you got to say it. If we continue to worry about that kind of thing, we would never have the automobile and we would just have, the buggy horse, and people, would resist changing over from horses to cars because of all the jobs that would be lost from people who would shovel the manure off the street. That was a legitimate concern about the unemployment effects of going from horses to cars. I'm serious. And that, there are countless examples of that. Now, I think when I was certainly younger, I was cavalier and said, get over it. And now I say, no, I'm sorry. It's going to be difficult. But that's all I'm going to say. I know it's going to happen. It's going to be difficult. There'll be transitions and they're hard. But I think the main difference, frankly, between America and other countries is we're willing to do this. Yes, people don't like it. And yes, it is hard for many people, or some people anyway. But unlike other countries, we are willing to make changes. And yes, there's resistance doing these things, but ultimately we do them. Now, there are many reasons why that is true.
Does intellectual honesty require a kind of moral courage that most institutions quietly discourage?
There's certainly that. There's certainly that. Now, you need that. And, it's obviously important to have empathy. And let's say I have more of it than I did when I was younger, but I'm not going to mislead you. Yes, it will be a major shock to the legal profession to be deregulated in the way that I discuss. There'll be some people, it'll be very hard, but we'll come out of it better, much stronger and better on net. But there will be people who are not going to be happy about it, even in ways that I won't be able to predict. And that's other areas too. I mean, AI is going to do the same thing. Any advance, many things about policy and technology have these kinds of effects, but we do them. And that's different for many countries. So, just hold on. That's all I can say is
I'm a little kind of tying it all together. I'm a little concerned about, like, with changes and politicians more worried about getting reelected than the future of the country. That's kind of where I think I'm worried in AI specifically. We could fall behind because Congress or senators are going to want to get reelected and not do whatever the quote unquote right thing would be.
frankly, I don't ever worry about falling behind. And I'll tell you why. We care so much about making money in this country more than anybody else. No one is like us in that way. We innovate, we work hard, we're creative. I'm serious. I've been to many places in this world and there's no one like us. No one like us. I don't care what you say about the Chinese. They have the worst government with communism. At any time, Xi or whoever's in power can step in and take a country's everything, a company's everything they've done and take it away. That threat is always there, right? And for people who are creative, they know that at any time something could be taken away from them. I think it is a tragedy what has happened, obviously, during this administration and discouraging in any way creative, innovative people from coming here. But I believe that is short run and that will not last, certainly forever and not much longer, I'm hoping. That's for sure. But there is no one like us. That is my view. Competition, making money, that's what people like to do in this country. But to do that, you've got to be creative, you've got to be innovative, got to work hard. And the very best people in this country do that still. And they lead the rest of us for doing that.
But couldn't
That's
you
what I
see a
think.
politician? Couldn't you see a politician, blocking and
Oh,
advancements using AI to keep their
of
voters
course.
voting for them?
Absolutely. They'll look, yes, yes. It's not going to be smooth sailing, I assure you. But again, these kinds of resistance, what they do is they lead then to responses, and people will try to think of creative ways to get around that. But again, the strength of America is not in its government. I mean, it is in the sense that its institutions could be a lot worse. That is for sure, as they are in other countries. The strength is in the private sector. We have a very dynamic, innovative private sector that is just a lot better than the private sector anywhere else in this world. And we're fortunate to have it. It's not appreciated enough, in my view, but we have it. And if people don't appreciate it, too bad. We know it. I know what it does. Let me put it that way.
That's great from a consumer perspective. Imagine telling somebody, whatever, 20, 25 years ago, you can press a button on your computer and literally 99% of the things you want will show up at your door in the next 2 days.
And who is responsible for that? We are, right?
Right.
Go to other countries. How many cool things really did they come up with? We came up with them. They have great food, much better than we
Yeah.
have.
They've got better food and they're happier. But
Yeah,
other than that, we
maybe,
got to beat.
maybe, maybe. Hard to say.
Let me shift the conversation slightly. In a discipline grounded in data and incentives, where does faith fit in your life?
Oh wow, it fits. I can't say it's something that I can explain necessarily to other people. I wouldn't say it's sort of formal or organized, but I think the faith is simply you do the right thing and the right things will happen, but you just got to keep doing it. And I would say, in my case, my faith is tenacity. I would say that, you know, that I believe in being what I am, which is a tenacious person, and just keep at it. That's I would say where that fits, and probably is what I'm all about in that sense.
When evidence and moral instinct conflict, which do you think has the final authority?
I don't know. I mean, there are things where I could go either way. I don't know. As I said, I can imagine either way it happened.
You sound like a lawyer in that response.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow. I could kill Hitler. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay? I could kill Hitler.
After decades of studying institutional failure, what still gives you confidence in the American experiment?
Private sector, baby. That's what gives me confidence. I honestly think that it's it's very powerful. It's amazing. So many things that we've done. There are constraints, obviously, and they have to overcome them, but they continue to do it. And the fact we're even having this conversation today, I think, is testament to that. So that's what's critical. As I said, I don't know where government's going. My hope is more it just doesn't get in the way. More ways so it doesn't get in the way is really my hope.
It kind of seems like on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican, it seems like both are kind of, and maybe it's kind of been forever where they're saying like we're doomed if the other side takes control, right, and all that stuff. And I'm so, I'm so against that too. I think we're living in the best time in human history is today.
Oh yeah.
What would you say if there's a listener who whatever doesn't, agrees with that sentiment? What would you say is kind of a why they should feel comfortable, why they should be happy that they're in America or where we're headed?
Look, you have more control of your life, and there's so many things that you can make use of to help your life. That's what I would say is, it's always got to come within, right? You got to sort of say, look, what do I want to do? What choices do I have? What constraints do I have? Just look at, it's funny. I'll watch, let's say, a 1940s film, film noirs, right? I don't know, you might like those, right? And, they're struggling to reach somebody, and I say, why don't they use their cell phone and call them? Right? Where you can just rattle off millions of things now like that, where life is that much easier. There's just so much more we know. There's so much more we can do. You should take it, healthcare. I mean, there's still amazing things. I mean, Tim is amazing. I mean, I look at Tim, I think, my God, look at what technological advance did. Right? I mean, you can't ignore that.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
100%.
but that's just one of many things that have happened, and everybody should appreciate that. I think the more you know, the more you realize that God, there are many things are out there, and things we can take advantage of. That's what they should feel secure about and confident about. But you got to work. I mean, that's no one's going to give you these things. You do have to make investments and work. But if you do, there's no better place in the world to be than here.
Before we close, brag about your family for a minute. Who are they, and what have they taught you that no economic model ever could?
An amazing wife of 45 years taught me everything, pretty much. The smartest person on the planet. 2 MIT degrees that are not just 2 MIT degrees. I mean, she's of that level of intellect, but also a human being, Southern, with all that comes with it, which can be quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, that in and of itself is enough for having 100 family members. My wife is thought of that way. And my formerly 2 Tonkinese cats lived to 22, utterly amazing, the most gorgeous creatures. Talk about people who knew what they were, cats who knew what they were, but I always thought of obviously as little people. Every day was a new day to them to show why it was an honor for me to be their guardian. And they reminded me of that. And I love them.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
Probably getting married.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
Parents divorced.
What are you most excited about?
My next book. I always look, next book.
What advice would you give your high school self?
Oh, God. Don't be a jerk. Don't be a jerk.
Do you have any book recommendations for us or for the listeners?
Oh, I think my newest book, I think that is the one, because it really covers a lot of what have been talking about, but it does also, it's meant to appeal to a broad audience in the sense of understanding markets and government. So market corrections, not government interventions, path for improving the U.S. economy. Yeah.
I'm going to have to read that, and then we're going to talk about the legal.
Did I send you that? Did I send it to you?
No, but I'm going to order one. Don't send me. I want to order it, and I'm going to call you back about. I'm all for deregulation.
Oh no, that's not the thrust of
that's
that
the last
book.
one.
It's a different one. Yeah,
That's the last
this is
one.
the most
Okay.
recent one that I'm recommending. No, the lawyer. Look, I have given my argument about lawyers in a number of op-eds, the Wall Street Journal, the Times. then there are comments. So, you see thousands of these guys writing in, saying basically what you said, which is just so
Yeah.
wrong, but still saying it.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
It's been super fun talking with you. Let me say that. I guess, I learned soon enough that you guys are lawyers, so we got to go in this direction, which
We couldn't have told you wouldn't have come on.
no, I would have come on, but
Just kidding, just
would have been even too much would have been just covering law and not enough, some of the other things you guys wanted to get into. So I've
Yeah.
enjoyed it. Tim, I just great admiration for you and what you've done and been able to continue to do. It's inspiring, great. Troy, fantastic son, obviously, and continuing
Thank
on
you.
with what you're doing. So this is just amazing, inspiring, totally joyful. How about that? Joyful for
That
me
was
to do
that was
this.
a lot of fun. Cliff, before we let you go, this is my last question.
Yeah.
At the end of every podcast, we ask all of our guests, who are a couple people that you know personally that you think we should have to try to come on and as a future guest?
Well, I can't say I know them personally, but I'd like you to have Beyonce come on. Let's see, who else do I want to have as another girlfriend? Let's see, Beyonce. No, who would be good on for you guys? I don't know if he's doing this now. He's in his 80s. Sam Peltzman, a University of Chicago economist. He's a character. He would have some interesting things to say. Um, I think he'd be good. Sam would be good. Um, yeah, a lot of people I'm thinking of, unfortunately, they passed away because they're funny. So it'd be good to have them on for that. Um, who else?
That's an interesting one.
Have Hillary Clinton on. Have Hillary Clinton on and get her to come to terms with the fact that she's just not trustworthy. I'm serious. You listen to her and she just has a truth problem. Get her to come to terms with that. Because she's obviously smart and talented, but you just can't get the truth quotient out there right. Yeah, that would be good. And one other one. Okay. I mean, as you can tell, I'm no fan of Trump. That's to put it mildly. The big question that I think we have really is why would an educated, reasonable person support him, let alone work for him? And I'm not asking anything of you to comment. So you better not tell me that you're big supporters. But in any case, forgetting that, get someone on like that. That would be invaluable, right? Because we don't know. That really is, to me, one of the challenging intellectual questions of our time. How did he get elected? I'm serious. I've not seen anything that I believe. I think, I don't know if I sent you this one. I wrote a piece about this, and my conclusion was he is the Chauncey Gardner of our time. You remember that film Being There with Peter Sellers? So Peter Sellers played this guy, Chauncey Gardner. All of his knowledge was obtained from watching television. He was a gardener. That's why they called him Chauncey, so to speak, Chauncey Gardner. And this Peter Sellers, it's an older film. Peter Sellers, brilliant. And everything he knew, he learned from television. He would talk with people and he'd give these, quotes from TV. And everybody thought he was brilliant. And he wound up moving up in society. And when there was an opening and they say, look, we have to have a new presidential candidate, they thought, let's get Chauncey because he's so brilliant, right? And the moral was simply, people perceived him to be what they wanted him to be. They didn't want to see him for who he was. They wanted to see him for what they wanted him to be. And I argue that is how Trump got elected.
I'm going to try to give you a one sentence response.
So get somebody. Yeah,
So it doesn't turn into a 45-minute debate again.
right.
I, I think I think it was all about who he ran against, not what he
Yeah.
was running on.
No, it matters. That mattered a lot. I think it did. But I would like you, yeah, get somebody on here, who supported him. And
But I think if you go back the last three presidential cycles,
right.
I think you could make an argument that the Democrats sent out,
Yeah,
like you said,
absolutely.
Hillary. Hillary, people just didn't trust.
No,
So he kind of gets in there.
right.
Biden was
And she
very
ran a
weak.
horrible campaign.
Yeah. But I'm saying I think
Right.
like in the sports world, people
Right.
people say they're like a schedule merchant.
That's
Like
right.
there's teams that aren't that good. They just beat a lot of bad teams.
Right.
Trump's 2-1,
No, I think
and
that's right.
he hasn't played against Obama
No,
or somebody like that.
no, I think there's a lot to that. No question about it. But I want to know how somebody intelligent, thoughtful could really rationalize voting for him.
I think that's how. I think it's the alternative.
Just the alternative. All right, maybe. I mean, I think. Well, as you know what the Mendoza line is. I mean, I would like them to say that he was below the Mendoza line. Right.
It's an interesting. Well, again, without re-sparking a long debate, I'm interested. I think it'll be interesting to see how history teaches this
Yes.
moment in time with the
Yeah.
last three presidential elections. It feels like have well, I guess the next presidential election will be very telling.
Yeah. No, I think there's certainly truth to that. No question. Still below the Mendoza line. Way below.
Clifford, you reminded us that good intentions are not enough, that systems must be judged by outcomes, and that truth often requires courage. Thank you for your rigor, your candor, and for joining us today. God bless you and your family.
Thank you.
Yeah,
My
thanks.
pleasure.
This was awesome. It was fun.
Great.